because strong speakers don't have to pass the mic. Strong speakers can ask good questions. Strong speakers can answer good questions. Weak speakers need help asking questions and answering questions. So I will encourage everyone to be a strong speaker, not to be a weak speaker. I will tell judges, if someone needs help answering a question, that is not a reason that team should lose the debate. That is not a reason the team should lose the debate. Even if they're showing that they're a weak speaker, you should take that into consideration when assigning speaker points, but do not make anyone lose the debate because they needed help. Whether that's help asking a question or whether that's help answering the question, these are not reasons to lose the debate.
These are great questions.
Hello. My question is, if your team comprises of 2 people, can you do 2 speeches consecutively?
Can you do 2 speeches consecutively? Ken's shaking his head right now. The goal, remember, is that at the very least, you give a constructive speech. So again, there's no rule against saying you couldn't give like the second and the third, and that at least you're giving the second constructive speech. But with, so again, strongly discouraged, you should not be giving the first and the second speech for your team, for your side. I encourage, if you're giving the first speech, I need a little break. I want to drink some water, I want to listen to the debate, and then I'm going to give the third speech again. But again, that's not required, that's an Isabel recommendation. But you and your partner should both be giving constructive speeches. You should not give 1 and 2. But otherwise, again, teams of 2, you have some flexibility on that.
The other thing is, if 2 people, think about it this way, 2 people on your team need to be cross-examined. 2 people, whether you're a 2 or 3 person team, 2 people on your team need to be cross-examined. It would be unfair to the other team, it would be unfair to the format if one person got to handle answering questions because they gave both speeches. So no hiding, guys. No hiding in this format. It's not designed for people to hide because we like strong speakers. And look, this is a competition, right? We all care about social justice. We all care about advocacy. Hopefully we all care about research. That's why we're here. But the competition aspect of this is that by Sunday, we're trying to figure out who is the best that's here, which means if you want to make a case for you being the best, you can't be hiding. And I think everyone is here to give their best and try to show their best. Yes? Yes? Okay, so that's what we're going to do. More questions?
How does Renson have a question? He's made it to the finals like the last 2 years. This is... No, he's here to win. I'm teasing him, sorry folks.
We shall see. So my question is basically on the, like during the cross-examination, because maybe the person who is going to cross-examine you is going to give you like the closed-ended questions, like they expect you to say yes or no, but you want to explain or justify either you are yes or you are no. In case they cut you off, like what are we supposed to do? The second thing is just on the idea of, okay, during the cross-examination still, like, can we do 7-minute speech, then 3 minutes cross-examination instead?
No, you can't do a 7-minute speech. That's an easy one. No, you can't do a 7-minute speech. Cross that off. Thank you for the suggestion. Rejected. On the question, this is a good question though, of what do I do in cross-examination? I want to explain my answers. Can the speaker cut me off? This is where we could talk for hours. We could have a whole weekend workshop just on cross-examination and how to do it. And I also think this is one of the hardest things to do effectively in really debate at all because of all those variables that you expressed. So as we explained earlier, it's really good to ask a sort of pointed question. It ends in a yes or no. Do you believe this is justice? Yes or no? Can you name this thing? Because it doesn't give the speaker a lot of room to talk. I would say broadly, judges hate when you are excessively sort of rude or short. So if you're trying to really cut someone off or speak over them or stop them from answering, things like that, that's looked down upon by the judges, and I would say and it's not polite, and that's not going about things the way you want to do it. There are ways to sort of signal that, hey, I have more I'd like to get through. I only have 4 minutes. I'm looking to get through a lot of material. So it's like, briefly, can you answer yes or no? Or before my next question, whatever it is, even demonstrating with your body language, hey, I have another question and I'm ready to go. And oh, on that, what you just mentioned, right? So there are ways to sort of politely signal and demonstrate and sort of take control of the conversation a little bit that I have another question to ask. In short, then, given by this answer, yes, when I'm a speaker, maybe Ken says, here's this yes or no question, and I'm going to say, well, enabled to establish this thing, blah, 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 and in the end, yes. But it's taken me 30 seconds to get to my yes. Of course. There's no way to prevent someone from sort of going about it. You don't have the right to sort of demand a yes or no answer. But a sort of short and efficient answer, and questions as well, you questioners who like to ask 3-part questions very, very long as well, is appreciated because the goal is to get to this dialogue, right? The goal is to have a discourse on this topic, on social justice, on this issue, and sort of try to learn more from it. That's how I think we view cross-examinations. So the person doesn't have to necessarily answer yes or no. On some level, it does make you look a certain type of way at the judge if you're really sort of bouncing around and not giving an answer. Like, did you understand it correctly? Did you hear what they asked? They said, is the sky blue? And you said, well, it depends on the crosswinds and the clouds. Like, no, they want an answer. I always tell my debaters, please tell them the sky is blue. It's okay to agree or say yes to a cross-examination question. It does not mean you're doing a bad job. But answer the question and continue that dialogue. But it's really hard to do, and there's no like fast rules. So I think it's something that you'll get better at throughout the day tomorrow.
I'm just going to say one brief thing on this, particularly because we're in the African Court on Human and People's Rights. And I don't know how many of you know, in addition to being a professor, I'm a lawyer by training. And there's one thing that's peculiar about most of our laws in any country. That's that we have rules, but normally we find in the law and in courts in particular, there are exceptions to those rules. In fact, courts make a lot of exceptions sometimes to rules. How does this apply to debate? You may ask me a yes/no question, but my answer may be yes, but. The yes is the general rule. The but is for me to explain exceptions. And so if you're the questioner and the witness is giving you a direct answer, yes, no, but, and they're just trying to explain their exceptions to the general rule or principle as they see them, please do allow them to at least do that if they're truly qualifying their answer. If you're the person giving the answer, don't use that as an opportunity to give a speech about the exceptions. Just state what they are. If more explanation is needed, that's what speeches are for, or your opponents can ask you a follow-up question if they want to. More questions?
Yeah, sorry, I was asking about the third speaker, the final rebuttal speech. Yeah, is he or she allowed to, like, analyze the debate in his team's favor? Like, for example, why did their team win the debate, or the clashes of the debate and why they won that clash?
You figured out the third speech. You should do exactly that in the third speech. Did you hear it? You should analyze the debate in your team's favor. Yes, that's the main component of that third rebuttal.
So my question is, if you're answering a cross-examination question from another speaker, and then it requires you to explain, rather you just answered like briefly, right? So could you ask them, do you want me to elaborate further, or are you just good there? Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, this is a dialogue. You can certainly say, I have a longer answer if you'll allow me to get to it. Or you could even say, hey, I'm going to get to this more in my speech, right? My second speech is actually going to address this more. But yeah, you're having a dialogue with that speaker, so I would say, have that question, right, with the speaker. Say, here's my answer, here's my brief answer. I'm happy to elaborate if you'll allow me. Sometimes they want to, right? Sometimes you want to go in depth about a team's research and sources or whatever it is. So that's a question for the speaker. But I also love saying, hey, it's going to come up in my speech. I'm going to go more in depth.
Here's the one thing I will caution you against. And this is everyone, I want you to follow this practice. If you're the questioner, it's your cross-examination. It's not the witnesses, which means everyone should respect the questioner and how they want to sort of use and manage their time. In other words, in your answer, yes, you could state, as Isabel just said, well, I actually have more to say, but they may say, no, thank you. I'm moving to my next question, or I'm moving to my next topic. That's not your chance to say, well, can't you just let me finish? Can't you just let me tell more? It's not that type of back and forth in a cross-examination, because then that would be disrespectful to the questioner. Now, we want to be respectful to the person who has the floor and has the right to ask questions and conduct their cross-examination as they see fit.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask on the topic of research and how specific do you have to be when stating your research? Do you have to state the sources? Do you have to table the sources? Yeah.
This is a great question. How do I cite my sources? I often tell my students, you want to try to cite it so that if the audience member could like look it up and find it later. So maybe I'd be like, according to Ken Newby from Morehouse College, justice means this thing, right? So sort of author, name, maybe the year if it's relevant, but it's enough information where the other team and really the judge can hear that and go, oh, that's a real source. That really exists, that's happened. As far as if I have to have it like cited or sorted or printed, I would imagine if you've been doing research, you do have it cited somewhere, right? You have that citation or the link, but at least the name and the author's name and the publication. But in the speech, it doesn't have to be any longer than, according to so-and-so, blah, 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 blah.
Let me say a word that maybe I need to update the topic format information on, which is just a word about AI. Because your question made me think about that. Because I know people may be using AI for their research specifically, and that's okay. There's no using AI to help you with your research. But a couple of things I need to say. Number one, don't rely on AI for evidence. In other words, no one should be quoting Perplexity or ChatGPT or whatever AI platform is of your choice. Well, Chat said, no, that's not a credible source for you to check, for you to cite, rather. In other words, if you use one of those sources or one of those platforms, go to the actual source, look at the actual article. Sometimes the AI has hallucinated, and what it told you was a source or it told you was evidence doesn't actually exist, which therefore would mean it's invalid. And that's not on the AI. If you're giving a speech and you're making a representation that something exists and it doesn't, that's on you. That's your ethos. That's your integrity as an advocate. So the burden and responsibility is on you to make sure you have good, real, credible evidence that you're using in the debates. And so I want everyone to use only good, credible evidence in the debate. And you may get challenged on this. If someone's like, wait a minute, I never heard a newbie Isabel. I mean, I heard a newbie, but I never heard a newbie Isabel article in the Journal of Social Justice in Tanzania. That source sounds a little suspicious to me. And if you get challenged because someone thinks your source is fake and you can't show that, it's real evidence, no, I really did this research, I really did this evidence, that could be a problem for you. Judges absolutely can take that into consideration and give someone a loss. However, what you cannot do is after the debate is over, and you didn't make an issue in the debate, hop on Google, round's over, oh man, they cited something, this is bad evidence, but you didn't make the argument in the round, well, I'm just going to run to the tournament director and tell them they should lose. We're not adjudicating rounds after the round. That's not a thing. That's not going to happen. Not in this tournament. Not in this competition. We will tell you, try to do better the next round. Maybe the next round, if you have questions about someone's evidence, you should raise it in the round so that the judge can evaluate your argument or your claim, and maybe the team can have an opportunity to rebut your claim. But all of that should happen in the debate, not after the debate.
Any other questions?
I wanted to know, what are the scoring criteria for the social justice debates, and are they supposed to be accessible to debaters? Because in World Schools debate format, we have the AREs and content style strategies, so what about this one?
I'm less familiar with the World Schools debate, so I'll let Ken do that. But I will say for the speakers and the judges, it's judged based on who won or who lost, who's the most convincing. So judges, you're going to circle one team, -1 or -1, and then you're going to get speaker scores 90 through 100. So you're going to say a 95 is sort of the average, that was okay. If it's better, I start adding points. We go up by half points. They could get a 95.5, a 98, whatever. And then if it's below average, maybe I noticed some sources by that newbie Isabel pairing, which I just don't think I've heard before, or whatever. I could go down. But I'll let Ken take the second half of that.
So, all right, when it comes to repeat your question one more time, because I think there's a dimension of it I want to make sure I get to. If you could just the scoring, okay, yes, the rubric. Sometimes in academia we call this, what is the rubric? And I know in certain formats they have very elaborate rubrics with 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different categories on this judging ballot. We don't have that. So the judging ballot for social justice debates, it is a very simple ballot. It says who won, who lost. It has the speakers' names, roles, and a space to assign speaker points, and that's it. For a couple of reasons that I'm going to explain, because everyone should understand. We want judges, number one, to give oral feedback. Studies have shown that if feedback is immediate, it's better, and the quality is enhanced. Number two, studies have also shown that people will write less than they will actually say. So we don't want people just sitting there and trying to write out their ballot when they could be talking to the teams that are right in front of them and actually giving them the feedback and the reasons for their decision. And we don't just encourage, I'm telling every single judge here, give a reason for your decision, announce your decision after every round. There are no closed rounds here. This is for us an educational exercise first, competition second. So we want the judges to give the feedback. Now, more directly to your question, well, Professor Ken, you still haven't told me the criteria for a judge for how they actually win the debate. What is it? And the reason why is because there is no simple rule, but I'm going to give you some ideas. Generally speaking, we say whoever the judge found to be more persuasive, whether that was the affirmative or whether that was the negative, that is who won the debate. Now, why are we so broad and so vague? Let me try to clarify that. Some people say, well, wait a minute, were the people who sounded better, they had a very persuasive manner where they were speaking, are those the people that won the debate? And I would say, well, if they sounded good, did they have good arguments? Did they have good evidence? Did they have sound logic? Because if they didn't have any of that, why did you think they sound good? Is it that you just like the melodious tone of their voice? That's what you mean by sounding good? Remember, our ballot asks who won the debate. Our ballot does not ask who sounded good. That's not a question that we want you to answer on the ballot. I mean, you can think about that for speaker points. You can think about who sounded good. But the ultimate question for the ballot is who won the debate? And for each debate, that's going to be a little bit different because it's contextual. It depends on what happened in that particular debate in that particular round. I always disliked those rubrics where some people have these ballots that have these boxes, and then people start checking the boxes. Oh, it's a 4 and oh, that's a 3 on logic. And a lot of times those boxes and those designations are very arbitrary in terms of how people assign those numbers. And so to get away from the arbitrariness of decision making in debate, we don't do that. That's why we don't do that, to make it actually more fair. And so that a judge has to decide who won, and then they have to think about the reasons why that side won, and then they have to do what? Explain themselves. They have to explain themselves in all of the reasons. And my judges, I would think those reasons should start with the substance of the arguments and why you found a particular team's 2 or 3 arguments more persuasive than another team's 2 or 3 particular arguments. I will tell you, sometimes in a good round, you have good arguments on both sides. Like where you've got only good arguments on one side, then this is pretty easy to judge. The harder rounds to judge are when both teams are making good arguments. The hardest rounds to judge are the rounds where a team's won one argument on this side, but a team won another argument on the other side. But nobody told you how the two arguments interact and how you should compare them and who should come out on top. And so now you're a judge and you're like, this one, and then they won that argument. Now what do? I have to figure it out because you have to judge the debate. What we say is figure it out and then explain yourself. Explain how you resolve that tension. Explain how you got to the conclusion that one particular team won that. Let me suggest to you that both in debate and in the real world, there's no single correct way to do that. So we don't try to prescribe a single correct way to do it because I think that would actually be unrealistic. And we're not trying to create a debate format or model that doesn't reflect reality and what people do in the real world. So I think this way, and trust me, we've done a bunch of social justice debates tournaments. Before it got to Tanzania, it's been in Tanzania now 3 years. Before it got to Tanzania, we were doing it in the United States for the last decade. I've hosted 10 of these on my campus at Morehouse College, and that hasn't been the only ones that have happened. Other schools like the University of Vermont, like Rutgers University, who's been here before to Tanzania, other schools around the United States have also hosted social justice debates, and we followed this same rubric, if you will, or method of judging. And from all of those rounds, so we're talking now thousands of rounds over the 10-year period at different campuses, this has been proven to be actually an effective way of evaluating debates, and most importantly, a fair way. Because at the end of the day, that's what most people want when they're in a debate competition. They want to be evaluated fairly. And so that's why when you get the transparency of how your judge got to their decision, even if you may not agree with their reasoning, we know that happens sometimes. That was a stupid judge. They didn't understand my argument. At least you understand how they got to their conclusion, always with this format. So that's how we do it. Sorry if that was a little long.
That was great. And we hadn't talked a ton to the judges yet. Any more questions?
Okay, so in the 6 minutes we're given, like the judges, what are you suggesting? Like, the team, are they expected to give out the detailed mechanism informations, or should we just argue using principles? Like, what are we expected to give out for the 6 minutes?
That's a great question. I think the answer is yes and yes. You have to do both, really. If I have principles but I don't have specific examples or an explanation of what those principles look like, I think it's really hard to be able to conceptualize and weigh and explain those arguments. But likewise, if I have a lot of details but I can't tie it back to justice or I don't have an explanation, I think that's really challenging. So I think to you, it's what's the most important that I have to fit in this 6 minutes, and my case can't live without. And I would really recommend trying to explain your case to someone else in advance. Like, try to explain it to your friend or your parent tonight. Like, can you explain it to them? Because if you can't explain it to the judge tomorrow. Yeah, but do you want to elaborate more?
I do. I want to answer this question in the context of the motion. We haven't talked a lot about the specific motion yet, but let's do that. So the motion is African states should require major extractive and land-intensive development projects to be co-governed by the state, private investors, and affected communities. Now, if you look at that and you break that down, the first question you might think about is, well, why? Why should African states require this? The answer is your conception of justice, probably, whatever that conception may be. The second question that comes to mind is the one Isabel was talking about, which is the how. In other words, the motion says African states should require major extractive and land-intensive development projects to be co-governed by these three parties. But how would that actually work in your world? What does that look like? That's for the affirmative to decide. That can look like a lot of different things. There's no one way that co-governance or shared governance actually works. So it's up to you as the affirmative to clarify in the debate what you mean by how that works and what that looks like. How much time do you need to spend doing that? Again, That is up to you. Some teams may feel the need to spend a lot of time clarifying what that means and what that looks like. Some teams may keep it very, very simple, and that's okay as well. Again, we leave that up to you. But in terms of what you should be doing, I think that's the answer to that question seen in the context of the motion. Does that answer your question, or you have a follow-up? Cool. I think there's a question up front.
Thank you. So my question was, I mean, is the team allowed to create its own parameters by their own perception, debating motion?
So the answer to that question is yes, in the context of the topic statement, meaning you can create whatever parameters you want, whatever case, whatever affirmative plan, whatever advocacy, as long as you do not contradict the topic statement. So that gives you a lot of freedom, but it also gives you limits. So you can think of the topic statement as sort of prescribing what your limits are of your creativity. More questions. And by the way, if we're going to answer all the questions you have, and then we're going to try to talk a little bit about the topic statement. There are a few things I just want to go over to ensure that everyone sort of understands what the debate is about, or at least we have that open discussion and conversation before tomorrow. More questions, though, about the format, because I think these have been great questions about the format. No? Any questions about how to judge before we move on?
I'm just going to say one thing. Raise your hand. Who's judging in here? Who's judging tomorrow? Nobody? One person? I'll go real quick, and then I'll stop, because most of you may know this. Judges, you should, when you get into the room, you're going to take down, and we'll say this again tomorrow, you'll take down the name, who are the teams here, or are they in the room? You're going to listen. I highly recommend, if not, would really want you to be taking notes. It could be on your phone, your computer, a piece of paper, that's fine. Take notes what's happening in the debate. That way I can do the evaluation we discussed about who has actually won, who am I more persuaded by. And then the end of the debate, that last speech has occurred, I need usually to take a couple minutes and think to myself, who was I persuaded by? I'm going to look over my notes, I'm going to think about it, and I'm going to try to figure out. I need the time because I know I have to explain it. I have to justify my decision to the debaters. So I like to take a few minutes, not a ton. I try to take around 5. If you need more, that's fine. We're trying to run on time. But I try to take a few minutes and think, okay, how can I explain this? Do I like my justifications? And then explain it. You may want to ask the teams to step outside into the hallway so you can think in quiet. If not, that's fine too. But you should be able to take that time to explain what's going on, and then you're gonna talk. So that's the rough outline for judges. I don't want to go more in detail because there's only 3 of you in the room. But if you have any questions, you can also come find me later. And again, we'll give another briefing to you all tomorrow morning. No more questions? Topic statement.
So remember, social justice debates, we always frame the debates sort of like a simulation where you're a social justice advocate. And so because you're a social justice advocate, whether you're affirmative or negative, we don't structure the debate so that you have to argue against justice. Like there's no side of this debate that is arguing for injustice when it comes to development. Now, your opponents may try to frame you this way. They may try to paint you into this picture, and it's okay to make an argument as to why your side actually would create injustice. That's an argument. But I want you to understand the way the debate is set up is for competing interpretations of justice and competing conceptions. And so at its heart, I think this motion is not a debate about development versus anti-development. It's more so a debate about justice, governance, and power. And what does that look like, or should, or ought that look like in the context of development? And so I'm going to try to briefly just go through why I think this topic matters right now in East Africa, what the motion requires, how both sides can defend justice, major clashes in the debate that you should be prepared for if you're not already, and then questions that separate strong teams from the average teams or weak teams. Before that, one brief tip, which is your first speeches, whether that's your first affirmative or your first negative, goodness gracious, if you haven't read that entire speech out loud before tomorrow, you have made a big mistake. You should absolutely practice that speech. You should absolutely time yourself when you practice that speech to make sure it does not exceed 6 minutes, because what you may find is that your speech is too long. And when your speech gets very long, then you start talking like this. You start talking very fast, 2024 environmental justice, 2025 migration justice. Like, you start talking so fast, you can become unintelligible. And that is not what we want, because I don't think unintelligible speech is persuasive speech. So practice those first speeches. Make sure they're 6 minutes. Now let's talk about why the topic matters briefly. So I think we all know that there are major projects that are happening all throughout East Africa. They're promising things like employment, infrastructure, energy access, industrialization, tax revenue, and poverty reduction. However, these same projects have the potential to displace people, disrupt food systems, damage water and soil, or shift wealth away from the places where the harm is concentrated. And so what this debate is really asking at its heart, I think, is who should shape development when local lives and national futures are both at stake? In other words, individual lives are important. The future of our nations and of our region are also important. And how those things come into conflict when we're talking about power sharing in the context of development is part of what this debate is about. So you're really debating about whether African governments should legally require 3 groups to share decision-making power. Those 3 groups are the state, which we think of as the government, private investors or private industry, private corporations, and affected communities. In other words, those local communities where these development projects are actually happening. And so on the affirmative side, that's stronger than just consultation. That means usually formal authority over that project's governance and sharing power amongst those 3 parties. So that raises another important question, central to the debate. Who should hold power over development? And I think every major argument in the debate will probably come back to this question of who should hold power over development. So when development affects the land, the labor, the water, the minerals, the ecosystems, the culture, people's livelihoods, who should make the final decisions about that development? The motion says decision-making power should be shared. That's the affirmative. The negative may say, well, justice requires power to be located in a particular place. What particular place? That's up to the negative. The negative could say that particular place is with the state. The negative could say that particular place is best with like private actors, go capitalism. Or that negative could say that place are our local communities. They should drive the decisions for development for everything. There are good arguments, I will tell you, on both sides of this discussion. I think the debate also will raise the hard question of what happens when the community says, no, we don't want that. Imagine the government proposes a major hydroelectric dam. It's going to bring electricity to millions, and we all know about power cuts. I had a power cut in my hotel like last night. You know, this happened to anyone else, but yeah, it happened to me like last night. Even it happened again this morning, where I'm getting ready, and like, boom, no power. That's okay. So, power dam may bring jobs, increase state revenue, bring electricity, but nearby communities may oppose the dam because families get displaced that would live near it. Or there are cultural sites that could be flooded because once you erect a dam and you trap water through a particular place, it has effects for communities, or traditional livelihoods could be affected. What happens when the community says, you know, because of these reasons, I get we want to stop the power cuts and bring more electricity, but we don't want it. When the community doesn't want it, and other people believe it's good, who decides? Who decides, or who should decide? That is part of what this debate is about. And so the motion basically raises 4 possible answers: the community, the state, investors, or shared governance. The affirmative is obviously arguing for shared governance. But again, the negative could argue the community, people should determine their own future, or the state, the government is best to balance local and national interests, or private sector, because they have the technical expertise and the economic realities that matter, that constrain things. All right, I'm going to pause there. Any questions so far about what I've said before I talk about justice? Because next I'm going to talk about development justice. Nope? Okay, good. We're on the same page. I think before you start debating sort of the model, you got to understand a little bit about the principle behind it, or the value, which in this case is development justice. I think development justice is more than just economic growth, like more than just build for building's sake, just because we want to raise the GDP. Right? Usually development justice asks us questions about whether development distributes power, wealth, opportunity, risk, and environmental burdens fairly. It examines whether marginalized communities have meaningful control over the decisions that shape their futures, or whether the benefits are shared or captured by corporations, national elites, or distant consumers. That raises a development dilemma. And I think a lot of debates are going to be weighing benefits against harms from these development dilemmas. On one hand, you've got benefits of development, like employment, infrastructure, hello electricity, tax revenue, energy access, industrialization, poverty reduction. On the other hand, you have harms of development, like displacement, like pollution, like loss of land, like cultural harm or erasure in some cases, like unsafe labor practices in the case of people really rushing for that quick, fast, beneficial so-called development, or even wealth extraction, where minerals from some countries are transported elsewhere and the wealth leaves the country. Right? These are some of the harms of development. So it's not development good, development bad, because there are benefits of development. There are potential harms of development. Justice requires us to compare these and try to figure out what's right or what's best. And so there are many, many different conceptions of justice. I'm just going to give you maybe just 4 for illustration. This is by far not an exhaustive list. But you can think about justice in terms of procedural justice, which is who gets a voice, who gets a say. You can think about distributive justice, which is, well, who gets the benefits? Who should benefit the most from this? Some people would say, well, the people that live in the community where the minerals come from obviously should benefit the most. Some people would say, well, no, the companies that have that technical expertise to extract and process the minerals should benefit the most, because without them, nothing would happen for anyone. We can debate this. You can have recognition justice, whose identity, culture, and dignity deserve respect. And how do we respect it? Do we respect it to the point that we say we're not going to allow any development if it's harmful to any culture whatsoever? I don't know. I don't mean to suggest answers to these questions. I'm articulating questions that I think can come up legitimately in these debates. How about environmental justice? Who should bear the cost of ecological harm from development? No one? Or should we, if it's ecological harm, say no development? I don't know. Let's focus now on understanding the motion. What the words require, what they don't require. What counts as a development project? Right? Usually a development project is a large project that substantially affects land, resources, livelihoods, and invoke some type of issue regarding community control. So that gets into industries like mining and critical minerals, oil and gas extraction, large-scale agriculture and industrial parks, dams, energy infrastructure, transportation corridors, ports, conservative zones, tourism developments, which I know are a major issue here in Tanzania and Kenya, and even urban redevelopment. Those are the things that kind of fit under the broad heading of development project. What about co-governance compared to consultation? What does consultation look like? Consultation also looks like maybe a public hearing, maybe getting advice from the community, maybe getting some compensation after the decisions are made, or maybe just being ignored and like, that's nice. You have your opinion, but What's co-governance though? Co-governance looks more like formal authority, decision-making power, power before decisions are made final, and where you don't treat any key actor as an afterthought because they're participating in some way meaningfully in the practice. So debaters have to specify, I think, these decision points. You have to decide, what could co-governance control? I think good teams will not say community power, just like generally in the abstract. Like, say what you mean. Explain which decisions communities help make and why those decisions matter, I think is the best practice. So who are affected communities, right? The people whose land, labor, water, housing, culture, livelihood, and environment may be substantially affected. I think effective communities are residents near these project sites for major developments. These are your stakeholders, guys. Workers, farmers, fisher folk, indigenous communities, displaced people, informal settlement residents, local civil society organizations who work on these issues. Communities, they're not monolithic, it should be noted. Communities are not always unified in what they think or what they want. So be careful and be cautious about those presumptions that may be made or assumptions in the debate. I think representation is a part of this debate. And just to say a little bit more about the unification or lack thereof in some communities, what if traditional leaders support a project but the young people in the community oppose it? Right? That's an example of where communities may not be on the same page. Or what if men benefit from the jobs while women will not? What if women will, they have to bear putting together the food or childcare, but they're not really included? What about that? How should that factor? What if local elites capture community decision making? So, okay, we've got a method, affirmative, for shared governance and community control, but what if that is vulnerable to just being dominated by elites? Isn't that really something we want to adopt, or might an alternative mechanism actually be better despite what you might write optimistically on paper? It's up for debate. What if a small group claims to speak for everyone? I don't know, maybe they were great debaters. It's a social justice debate, so now everyone wants to listen to them, so they end up speaking for everyone. What about that? Again, the community is not always unified for these reasons. All right. Almost done, guys. Are you hanging in there? You still with me? Any questions? I'll pause. No, I'll keep going then.
Okay, really quick room check. Sema baridi kama huelewi, moto kama unaelewa. Yeah, because I know wengine you might not understand and maybe you don't know how to ask. So kama you don't understand, just let us know, yeah? Or you can just call me privately and just be like, Dan, I don't understand. Sawa? Yes.
Also, if it's easier for you to ask a question in Swahili, by all means ask it. I'll ask Diana to translate, and then we'll try to give the best answer that we can.
Yeah,
because sometimes you may not have the right words to formulate your thought in English, and I get that. I understand that. I'm multilingual. Sometimes I definitely don't have the right words in Swahili. My Swahili is like, it's very, 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 very moderate. French is a little better.
Yeah, so it's a really great opportunity for you guys to ask questions if you do have one. In any language. I speak multiple.
Okay, let's talk about sort of is there a question? All right, let's talk about my third point, and I only have 4 points, by the way, so this is the third one. I think the strongest debates will happen tomorrow and this weekend when both sides are actually defending justice and articulating how they're actually defending or supporting justice in some way. I think from the affirmative, the worldview is development must be shared. That's given to us from the motion itself. And development's unjust when it's imposed on communities without shared power. Communities should have enforceable authority because projects reshape land, water, labor, culture, livelihoods, etc. And co-governance creates accountability, legitimacy, and protection against extractive patterns of development that would ship it elsewhere. So what should affirmative teams explain? I think they should explain in their model of shared power, it should be concrete. Tell me who represents the community. Tell me what decisions require shared approval. Tell me how are the benefits distributed. Tell me how are environmental harms monitored. Tell me what enforcement power exists if promises are broken. In other words, how are you holding people, entities, organizations accountable in your model of shared power? Now, you may decide to answer one or all of these questions, or none. Remember, these are suggestions for guidance, for clarification. These aren't requirements or rules for the debate. However, I think if you do some of this, you're going to have a great case, which is why we're having this session and talking about this. What about the negative side? What's that worldview look like? I think the negative is not against any governance. That'd be kind of ridiculous. I think the negative view is development requires effective governments. And then the question becomes, well, what is effective, Professor? So mandatory tripartite governance, which is the affirmative, may sound fair, but fail in practice. If something fails, is it effective? I don't think so, right? If it fails, it's not effective. If I get all F's on my report card, I wasn't really effective in my classes, was I? No. So, shared governance may create delay, uncertainty, investor flight, like those millions of dollars that we wanted to come into the country for development. Goodbye, they're gone. Bargaining failure, or even local elite capture. Justice may be better served by a developmental state, community control, ordinary regulation, litigation, benefit agreements, or even investor accountability, or some of these. So how can the negative defend justice? I think that's a question that maybe some people may not be obvious. You may be thinking, wait a minute, shared governance, affirmative, they're obviously the better view for justice, right? Not necessarily. Because justice is not only about participation. We get that from affirmative. Of course, they're going to get that participation of all three. It's built into the motion. But justice can also be about the developmental state. In other words, a state is accountable to the whole country, not only to one affected locality. It can also be about poverty reduction. That's the jobs, the roads, the energy, the public revenue. Those are social justice outcomes. If people can't work and they can't earn a living to feed their family, it's a justice issue too. It could be about future generations. What are the long-term benefits that may justify difficult trade-offs today? Sometimes we make short-term sacrifices for long-term benefits. That's for justice too. What about community control? If the community bears the burdens, equal power with investors may not be enough. Remember, the affirmative is arguing for shared power. That may not be enough. Negative may say the community needs more control than equal power. The community needs to dominate. The community needs to lead the charge, drive the bus, steer the train, however you conceive of it. That's how I think negatives can defend justice. What are some negative alternatives? Well, they can talk about stronger environmental and labor regulation. They can talk about community benefit agreements with enforcement. They can talk about courts, administrative review. They can talk about reputational pressure and social license. They can talk about direct community veto for development projects or community ownership of projects instead of shared control of those projects. So I think the negative has a lot of opportunities and avenues to defend justice on its side of the motion. The negative is not the no justice side of the motion. That's what I wanted you to get out of this last couple minutes. All right, I'm on to my fourth and last segment. So, but before I talk about key clashes and where I think the debates will be won and lost this weekend, are there any questions about what I just covered? Yes, a hand. Diana, in the back on the left. Oh, I can't hear. I'm sorry, Diana.
Okay, so my question is, when you are listing down the justices, you said procedural justice, development justice, cultural justice. So in the topic statement, there is something recognition justice and distributive justice. I would like to hear any clarifications on that.
Well, this is where sort of research is really, really important because, again, it's not our intent to sort of define everything for justice. So in other words, I left those concepts vague on purpose in the topic statement. Why? Because there's a lot of literature that talks about things like distributive justice, which simply is understood as who gets the benefits, where do those benefits go, where do those benefits flow, or recognition justice, which goes to whose identity, whose culture, whose dignity do we respect? That's why it's recognition justice, because some people would say, look, we're not going to do that development project if it would destroy Maasai culture in Tanzania, for example. Tourism is great, but if that means that the destruction of the Maasai culture is too valuable and too integral to Tanzania, that we're going to say absolutely no. So we recognize that culture, we recognize that group, and we want to do right by them. We want justice for them. That's I'm using that as an example for illustration. Is that helpful? Not helpful? If you have another question, it's okay. We'll get the mic.
So I understood why you left them out, but the other justices that you mentioned were quite clear. But in distributive and recognition, each team would have their own understanding of it, which could actually bring I could say an imbalance in the misunderstanding. Yes.
Yeah, and that's the clash, right? So you're right. You're exactly right. Each team could have their own understanding of justice, and then the question becomes for the judge: which one should I prefer? Which one should I accept? I'll give you an example, maybe out of the context of this debate that's easier to understand. You can conceive of justice as fairness, but then what does it mean to be fair? Some people would say, well, if we all have an equal opportunity, I think that's fair. If we all we're given the same opportunity to do something, I think that's fairness. That would be justice. Other people would say, well, wait a minute. There's no such thing as equal because you have skills. You're born with certain skills that I don't have. Right? We're all born a little bit different. We have pluses, we have minuses. So some people would say, well, I think fairness is only equity, and equity looks at outcomes. So I don't care about your equal opportunity, Professor Ken. I care about the end. In the end, is it still equal? Is it still fair? Because give you a simple example. I'm short, right? It's kind of obvious. If you give me a box to stand on, because I'm trying to see something, right? I step up onto the box. But my 6-foot-tall friend next to me gets the same box. Yeah, that's you, Josh. He gets the same box, and he steps on it. Guess what? He's still taller than me. Now, we had equal opportunity, but is it fair that now he gets to see over the fence and I don't because I'm still short and that box wasn't high enough? Right? People who believe in justice as equity would say, no, you got to give me a higher box so that we can actually see at the same level. But if you give me a higher box, now guess what that's not? That's not equality. My box is higher than his. It's not the same. That is not equality. But that is justice as equity. What's correct? That's what we debate about. And I would suggest to you that depends on the situation. That depends on the context. That helpful? Cool. 5 minutes? Okay. I'm being given the 5 warning, which is fine. Let's see if let me just run through these key clashes within 5 minutes. So, clash number 1, and these are clashes, my rebuttal speakers, if you're wondering what the debate is going to come down to, what are key clashes you might think about organizing your speeches around, these are the cheat codes. Everyone likes cheat codes, right? That's what this is. So, first clash, participation versus outcomes. Is justice primarily about giving people a voice? That's that equal opportunity. Or is it about material improvement? That's that equity. What's the actual change to produce it? I think affirmatives are going to argue communities should not be sacrificed for growth. Participation itself is part of justice. But I think if I'm negative, I'm probably arguing jobs, infrastructure, poverty reduction. That's also about justice. If you're not giving me that, I don't have justice. I don't care how much participation you gave me in that decision that did nothing to change my life. Great. I got to vote yay. And then you took everything away. So winning teams will compare which model better protects both dignity, I think, and material welfare. Clash number 2, shared power versus efficient development. I think affirmative may argue that, listen, some veto points are necessary when projects create irreversible harm. But the negative may say, well, wait a minute, too many veto points can create gridlock, opportunities for corruption, policy rigidity, and bargaining failure. So debaters are going to have to compare this accountability against adaptability. Third key clash, who speaks for the community? Since representation is not just a footnote, that's a justice question. So affirmative, sharing with all, right? Let's include everyone, women, youth, workers, marginalized groups, that's affirmative maybe. Versus the dangers of all, because there are dangers of including everyone. You know, anyone ever hear the phrase "too many cooks in the kitchen"? Spoiled broth, right? That's negative, right? Co-governance may empower local elites, unelected organizations, or factions, rather than just ordinary community members. You may bring some people in the kitchen that don't mean the food very well. So I think the strongest teams will explain their institutional design of who speaks for the community, who should, and how that works best. How about state versus community versus investor? Which actor should hold primary authority? That's hard to debate. That's a clash I think is going to be in every round. Local autonomy versus national development. What if the local opposition conflicts with broader public benefit? Ooh, these are the very tough real-world debates. It's going to hurt this local community, but the nation will rise. What do? Who decides? Who should decide? The affirmative is going to say people closest to the harm should not be treated as sacrifices for national growth. But the negative might say, well, the state's got to balance local costs against national interests of electricity, infrastructure, food security, things that benefit the masses of people. And we say maybe bring justice. So the hard question for the debate is who decides what is best for a community? And how you define that community is important in that too, isn't it? How about corporate responsibility and stakeholders, right? Because businesses affect more than shareholders. You know what? I'll talk about that a little. So stakeholder theory asks corporations to account for people affected by their choices. Affirmative may say affected communities should be institutional decision makers in projects because they're going to reshape their lives. While negatives may say stakeholder responsibility does not necessarily require equal co-governance. We can have regulation and enforceable agreements, and that may be enough. That may be enough. So let me caution to use examples strategically. I think examples are good for illustrating mechanisms, but they don't replace arguments. They don't replace arguments. So like Tanzania, you might talk about mining and resource governance. Kenya, you might talk about LAPSET and land infrastructure. Uganda, you might talk about oil development. DRC, you might talk about critical minerals and global demand. But don't just like name drop examples in cases. Explain who held power, who benefited, who was harmed, what governance model would change, I think will be helpful. Last, there are a couple of questions I think you should ask yourselves that will help you prepare for the debates. Questions about development and justice. Is development and justice primarily about participation or outcomes? Can a project be unjust even if it creates jobs and economic growth? Should communities have the power to stop projects or no? I'd have a whole cross-examination maybe on that. I'm just saying. Should governments override local opposition for national development goals? Who should decide technical questions involving mining, dams, energy, or environmental risks? I think when we think about future generations, we think about whether or not current residents have the right to block projects that may benefit people who are not even yet born. So they can't speak, they're not here yet to speak. So how should we balance immediate harms against long-term benefits? Can communities make choices that harm their own future? In other words, can we care more about the people who are here than the people who will be here? How do we balance that? Should justice prioritize self-determination even when others believe the choice is unwise? I think these are philosophical questions that you have to ask yourself. And then finally, yes, we're getting to the final slide. How strong teams will win this topic? Don't simply talk about harms and benefits of development. Remember, I gave you both. There are both. That's easy. They're going to compare governance models. That's how you win this debate. So define the actor with power and explain why that actor, whichever you choose, should decide. There are 4 options in this debate. Then use the African examples to illustrate, not as a substitute for your analysis, but illustration of your analysis. Then compare. Compare what? Compare participation, compare outcomes, compare legitimacy, efficiency, and accountability between the two sides in the debate. Then answer what? Answer the argument of the other side. You better do that. Answer the strongest argument of the other side and the strongest version. Take them at their best. The strongest version of that argument. And then last, explain. Explain why your model produces better developmental justice. I think that's how strong teams will win. They're going to define, they're going to use examples, they're going to compare the things I said compare, they're going to answer the other side's strongest arguments in its best form, and they're going to explain why their model produces better developmental justice. I think you do that, and you win a lot of debates this weekend. So ultimately, the question here is not whether Africa should develop. That is not the question. And how? Questions? Josh can't leave yet. Sit down. No more questions? I'm sorry, I went over the 5 minutes, maybe 6, 7-ish. But the time is 4:45. We promised that we would get you guys out of here by 5. So that's what we're still striving to do. If there are any more questions, I think we've concluded the presentation. Or if Isabel, you had anything you wanted to add about the substance of the topic statement, I'll pass the mic.
All right. Kuna mtu yote ambaye ana swali? Baridi moto. Mmeelewa mjaelewa?
Let me ask the audience one question. Does everyone feel like they understand at least what the debate is supposed to be about? Is anyone still like, I'm not sure what we're debating tomorrow? Because that's the whole goal of this, was to make sure everyone understands how to debate. That's the format and the rules stuff. And then you understand what the debate is about. That's what we just spent the last half an hour talking about. So we all on the same page? If you're not, don't be embarrassed to raise your hand like, I'm still not sure. This is like the last chance to ask that question, because tomorrow it'll be really hard to ask me or Isabel these questions. Yeah. Can you give him the mic? I only heard the first half. He's dropping off for me now. That and my ears are getting tired. It's been a long day.
Like whenever you are defending the like co-governance, is it a must for you to defend like both the three parties, or you can pick two parties, for instance, like the government and the investors, or is it a must for you to include the
Affirmative,
three
this
parties?
is easy. I'm going to cut you off because I know where you're going. Affirmative has to defend all three. That's easy. Affirmative has got to defend all three. It's shared governance. Topic statement says shared amongst these three. That's what it is. Affirmative don't run from the debate. Any more questions? I like that question because I hate for someone to try to get too creative and then find out tomorrow that like that wasn't the move.
So, based on what he said, what about the negative? Can the negative also pick just two parties, or it is a must? He has to choose only one party.
The topic statement says the negative should pick one. Defend that.
Only one party.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, let me clarify a nuance. Just because you're picking one, this is one to lead. It's a reality that even in, like, let's say you pick the government to lead in your negative. Does that mean there's no role for the community at all? It does not mean that there's no role. Every governmental process that I know of includes some avenue for community input. But this does mean that the government is in control. This does mean that the government is in control, for example. So when we talk about power sharing, we're talking about power sharing for the affirmative. If we're negative, we're not talking about power sharing amongst these three, but that doesn't mean the three go away because they still exist. There's no world on the negative side in which the government doesn't exist, even if you say local communities should lead the charge. There's no world in which communities don't exist just because you say the government should lead the charge. So if on the negative you want to explain sort of how that works and what that looks like, that's okay, but you just shouldn't cross the line of the affirmative being shared governance. So like the more it looks like you're talking about like equal power sharing between the three parties, then that's probably wrong. Someone's got to be dominant on the negative. I don't know who's going to be dominant, but someone's got to be dominant on the negative. Yes.
Can you attack the evidence or examples of any other arguments which are invalid?
Yes. The simple answer to that is yes. You can attack anything your opponents say in the debate. You can attack their evidence. You can attack their examples. You can attack their logic. Anything they say, fair game for attack. Just don't attack their personhood. Remember, I said anything they say. They say they're a beautiful person. You don't need to attack that. Like, we don't like ad hominem. Those are called ad hominem arguments or ad hominem fallacy. I always say, be kind to your opponents. Be unkind to their arguments. So we're going to be kind to our opponents. We'll be unkind to their arguments. And that's a principle.
Okay. I think I want to ask a question as well. We understand that this is happening in status quo, especially in East Africa. We see this in northern Tanzania, and it's affecting a lot of people. Then how then would you suggest someone to go about the complexities of these issues without like oversimplifying them? Like, what does middle ground look like? Or do you not have to be like in the middle ground? If you get my question.
I think I do. Let me answer it this way. Number one, I don't think there has to be a middle ground. But number two, okay, I guess I have 3 points. Number two, I'm going to qualify myself. I'm not a topic expert, guys. The topic expert was actually supposed to be here, but she had a conflict come. She will be here tomorrow. She will also be here on Sunday. So even though I've been talking a lot about the topic, I've been talking as a debate professor who's done research and read articles about the topic and helped draft a topic statement to frame the debate. So I've been speaking as a person who helped frame the debate and the discussion. But substantively, I have not studied this stuff. I'm not the topic expert. Topic expert is coming. So forgive me if my answer is a little light, because I think your question goes to a good, strong, substantive foundation question to the topic. Because she's asking about, well, is there a middle ground? What's the middle ground we could argue? And to some extent, when we construct debates to have a debate, we do have to frame it so that there are two sides. And we know in the real world, there can be 3 sides, there can be 4 sides, there can be 8 sides. Like, things don't fit into these categories. But we hope that we framed the debate and we framed a discussion that's at least still a good discussion that gets to the heart of a lot of the decisions that need to be made and decided, even if it doesn't actually get to all of them. And I think for me, Diana, that's kind of what your question brings out, which is that there are limits to having this debate in these contexts with the rules that we have. But we have to have those limits because your time is limited. You remember, you only get 6 minutes for your constructive speeches. The total time that social justice debate round takes is like 42 minutes, like, of actual talking time. So there's only so much time to talk about the issues. So we have narrowed it. Again, that's why the topic statement has a certain framing. It does limit the discussion in some ways. In other words, you're not going to have time to talk about every aspect of development or developmental justice or for things. It's just not. You could spend a whole 3 hours just talking about developmental projects in northern Tanzania, how those should work and function and operate, right? So keep that in mind. What is this debate about? This debate is not about any particular project. This debate is about the big picture. So don't feel bogged down, especially if your opponent may have an example about a project you don't know anything about. That's okay. Remember, that example is just that. It's one example, and it's illustration. Examples are not arguments. Examples are not analysis. Examples are evidence that we use to support analysis and arguments. So by all means, have them, but have some other things too. More questions?
No. Before I give the mic to Diana or whoever's going to tell you about tomorrow, right, and when to come, and we're so excited. If you just arrived this afternoon and didn't, I'm going to put on my tab hat for a moment, and didn't come talk to me, again, if you're really from any school except Nikito, if you're from Strathmore School, and if you already talked to me, that's great. As long as it's the same as when you talked to me earlier, we're good. If I can have a representative from UDSM Rogoth, if you just want to come, I would like to check folks' registration on the tab, please. So before you leave, and again, I'm going to give that to other people to have you depart, please make sure we just double check so that tomorrow morning it can go smoothly and we can have these great conversations about the topic. So that's just my plea before we get out of here. But this is the last chance for questions, and these are great questions. But again, you're thinking, wow, I haven't talked to Isabel yet, and I just got here this afternoon. You're going to come say hi, talk to me, and make sure I have you on the tab, and Rogoth or somebody from UDSM. Okay, great. Thank you all so much.
Oh, thank you. A round of applause for Professor Ken and Coach Isabel. So as Coach has said, if you have any questions or any remarks to the two of them, you could follow them. But I think we could end it for now, right? We're good. You learned something, right? Oh, okay. Okay. But you picked something today from two of them. Okay. So without wasting any more time, I'd like to welcome Eben to tell us about tomorrow, where are we going, how are we dressing up, how should we appear, I'm kidding, how should we be tomorrow and prep up for everything. Eben. Oh, Eben. Okay. Oh, okay. All right, so Eben will come and give you more details, but the venue for tomorrow is called Habari Maalum. Do you all know where that is? Anyone who's situated in Arusha? Anyone who lives here? Do you guys know where Habari Maalum is? Okay, ni wapi? Amazing. Yeah, and we also have a group chat, so make sure you're in the group. If you're not in the group, you can come to me and I can add you in the group, because most of the information will be sent there, the topic statement in case you don't have it, which I think many of you do have it, the timetable, the schedule, and all that. All right.
Hi guys. Just finishing one message. How's everyone doing? Yeah, you guys are good? I see smiles. I see smiles. Yeah. They say when you speak to people, if you smile, then they'll smile. So yeah, I like that people are smiling now. Great. First of all, my name is Eben. For those of you who don't know me, programs manager at TCRO, but I'm also convening this year's social justice debates. I'm excited for everyone to be here. Really with the period in time that we currently are in, a lot of universities and a lot of high schools are currently having examinations, and that really kind of affected the participation numbers. But definitely, looking forward, we're really happy for everyone that was able to come. I know definitely there's some challenges here and there, some challenges faced today as well. As part of Ocom, we really do want to apologize for maybe some of the challenges that you guys faced today. We do still believe that you guys are going to have an excellent time in Arusha. For those of you, of course, who are coming from outside. The first time I came here on Thursday, I think I came on Tuesday. It was too cold. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Yeah, I'm told some people can't hear me. Right, so moving on. Tomorrow we are going to be starting our preliminary rounds for the social justice debate. We've been having some challenges with our host for the preliminary rounds. However, we will be having it at a college known as Habari Njema College. We will send this location because in the morning some people, I don't know where they're going, but we had some challenges with the locations in the morning. We will send a location on the group. Of course, the different groups that you guys are a part of, so that we are all aligned for tomorrow. Specifically, the people who are staying at the accommodation. Guys, I hope you hear me. We're going to be leaving at 7 a.m. Yeah. Yes. The venue is quite far. It's a bit outside Arusha. So in order for us to be on time, we will have breakfast. If you guys looked at the schedule, we were supposed to have tea, right? However, we've transferred that to tomorrow. So in as much as whether or not you have breakfast at your accommodations, you will have breakfast when you arrive at the venue, right? So in order for us to make that happen, tomorrow, as you see in the schedule, we have 4 rounds, right? Those of you who know how 4 rounds are, if you start at 9 or later on than that, you'll finish at 7 p.m. All right? So it's very important that we leave very, very early. Yes. So of course, go do your research today, but also get to know one another. I don't think we know each other here. Yeah. Do we know each other?
No.
Yeah.
People have sat according to schools and college.
Yeah. So guys, tomorrow, we're going to actually be policing this, by the way. We're going to be policing this. Tomorrow, we don't want you to be sitting next to your colleague from the same institution or university. Like you sit next to a person you don't know. That we're going to be policing that tomorrow, right? Yeah. Great. I think that's majority of the information from my side. Happy to see you guys tomorrow. I think, as Isabel said, if there's anyone who hasn't registered, please do that now.
Any questions to Eben?
Any questions? most of the communications, of course, I've been communicating through your heads of delegation. So if there was any lapse of communication, you know, it was here and there. But we will be sending out information in the group that Diana talked about. So make sure that you're a part of that group. Yes. Final questions, comments, additions, subtractions, multiplications, squares, divisions? Okay, yeah. I assume people didn't hear this. I said we were supposed to have tea today, right? However, we'll have it tomorrow as breakfast. Yeah, he understood. So I'm assuming everyone has understood. Great. All right, guys, thank you very much. Happy to see you guys. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you.